Before we begin, the Lethbridge Public Library acknowledges that we are gathered on the lands of the Blackfoot people of the Canadian Plains and pays respect to the Blackfoot people past, present, and future, while recognizing and respecting their cultural heritage, beliefs, and relationship to the land. The city of Lethbridge is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. C.L. Polk is the author of the World Fantasy winning novel Witchmark, the first novel in the Kingston Cycle. After leaving high school early, they worked as a film extra, sold vegetables on the street, and identified exotic insect species for a vast collection of, I don't even know if I can pronounce that, before settling down to write silver folk fantasy novels. Polk lives near the Bow River in Calgary, Alberta, in a tiny apartment with too many books and a yarn stash that could last a decade. They ride a green bicycle with a basket on front. So before we begin with sort of the questions that I've prepared, if you have any questions, please feel free to pop them into the question and answer at the bottom, and I will periodically read them out to you if that's okay. And tonight we're in partnership with Lethbridge Pridefest, so we're really glad that they were able to partner with us on that and celebrate Pride this month. So welcome.
Hello.
How are you doing tonight? You good?
I'm pretty good. Kind of like I'm writing a book, so I'm very difficult to talk to. I apologize in advance.
I'm not a writer, so I don't know that whole world, but I can feel like they're, I'm sure that's a tough thing to go through.
It can be.
Yeah. I guess it depends on where you are sort of in the process of writing.
Yeah,
ebbs and flows.
I'm trying to write something that's very new to me. I'm trying to write a book that has like 3 different characters who have point of view, and they all have their own agenda in the story, and it's like absolutely high epic fantasy. It's like yeah, it's just it's all new territory, and so like it takes a lot of brain sweat.
I can imagine that's a lot I always think like when people have a lot of characters with their own points of view, it must be hard to keep track of all of that, and then to add fantasy, which in of itself is like so world building. Like it must, do you keep track like with notes or like sticky notes? I mean, that's what I would do.
I have a piece of software called Aeon Timeline. I think it cost about $50. And basically what I do is I create a file, and then I create a custom calendar in that file. And then I pick my starting date and I record events as they happen. But with 3 characters, I realized fairly quickly that I have to kind of keep track of where everyone is and what they're doing, even if they're not in the scene. And I'm really glad I have Aeon Timeline.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. Actually, I'd never heard of that. I always wondered how people keep track, so that really makes sense. Somebody put into the chat, hello, their name is Barb. I've been a huge fan of yours since convention days in Calgary. Congratulations on all your success.
Thank you.
About not signing with your agent until 47 really spoke with me.
Yeah, I mean, I took a while. I didn't actually seriously start writing until about 2000, 2001. And then I kind of took a long break in the middle there. So yeah, it took me a while.
So, okay. Some of the questions that I prepared for today. Your first 3 books were a trilogy with elements of queer romance. The Midnight Bargain is a straight couple. Do you feel that there was a difference in the reception of the books?
I really don't know. Like I don't know what people think of my books unless they tell me. And generally people are polite enough not to tell me anything unless they like it. So I think they like it.
I just finished reading Midnight Bargain and I really enjoyed it.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. Also because I was like, wow, this is like everybody that has watched Bridgerton should now read your book because it's like a better version of that. I don't know, that was what was in my head the whole time. I was like, read this. It's a better version of Bridgerton. Somebody just sent us a question. So I'm always curious about authors' early lives. Were you an avid reader as a kid? Or what was your childhood in relation to the books like?
I learned how to read really early. Like I was reading books without pictures in them silently when I first attended school. Like I learned really early how to read. And I was voracious. I think maybe I was compelled to read. But fortunately for me, my mother was a big reader, so she believed in having lots of books in the house. And when I lived with my grandparents, my grandmother was also a big reader, and she had all of the books that my father and my aunts and uncles had read when they were kids. So I had a ton of books to read, and I had one constantly. I was the child who walked to school literally reading a book and walking at the same time. Um, I was the person who never left the house without two books, because what if I finish the book that I'm on?
Mhm.
I read a lot, and if I didn't have something to read, um, I would find something with words on it and read that, like literally the cereal box, cleaning products under the sink. It
Mhm.
did not matter. I needed to
Yeah,
read it.
nice. Okay. So somebody else was wondering, do you feel there's an expectation as a non-binary author to tell queer stories?
Um, I'm not exactly sure. Um, I think there might be an expectation and I just haven't noticed, because that's generally what I write anyway. The Midnight Bargain was kind of an anomaly because I needed the characters to be straight in order to tell the story, which I always thought was kind of an amusing reversal of people telling me that I shouldn't write queer characters into a story unless there was a story related reason for them to be queer. So
Mhm.
it's like, okay, here you go, story necessary straights.
Somebody else was wondering, what is easier to write, the romance elements or the fantasy elements?
Um, I think it depends on what part. Um, I think that the fantasy elements are a lot of fun to write. um I kind of can't stop myself from writing stories set in fantastical worlds. It's kind of where I live. I started reading fantasy novels fairly young and I didn't quit. um so that's kind of like making up a world where magic works and having people believe it is Tuesday to me. How do I get these people to kiss? Oh, please. How do I, like, when I get to that point, it's like I need to rearrange my books. I need to vacuum the blinds. I need to declutter my kitchen cabinets. And it's like, what are you stuck on? Literally half a page of writing.
You must have a really clean house though.
Well, I mean, like I I tear it apart, I put it back together, and then I tear it apart again.
Okay. Okay, somebody else was wondering, you delve into some deep ideas in your books. such as the way that women must give up their magic to have children. Can you speak about what inspired you to explore those ideas?
Well, I mean, the Midnight Bargain, specifically, the whole thing with the women can't do magic because they have to have babies. That was kind of directly influenced by state level anti-choice legislation happening in the States around the time that I started the book. I was like really mad about that. And I decided that I was gonna take this and basically use it to kind of talk about why it makes me angry. The other component that I had in the Midnight Bargain was the whole idea of like how a lot of the work done by women is unpaid. And I don't mean just like, like housekeeping and child minding. There was a really long thread on a site called Metafilter, and it was in response to a long essay about emotional labor. And the Metafilter thread was enormous. It was literally thousands of comments, and I read every single one.
Oh, wow.
And and like I read them and I was like, oh my God, do you know how many times I've picked up somebody else's sock? Do you know how many times I have like carefully like edited the thing that I was going to say in order to manage other people's emotional reactions? Do you know how many times I got severe pushback when I didn't do that and just said like, these are the bare facts of the issue and I'm not taking care of you? And so like I was annoyed. I wrote it into a book, which is kind of the writer's ultimate weapon.
Yeah, that was one thing I really enjoyed. I mean, it's so sad that like those elements of, women's choices are still very much the forefront of our, media cycle right now, right? Like what's happening in Texas, right? So,
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's really important. Like you don't have, like, it's not blatant, but as a reader and as a woman, having those elements in a book, I think is really important because a lot of people forget that, or they, I've had a lot of conversations I know with people about, feminism and the importance of it. And, every woman should be a feminist because it's important that we have we fight for the rights of everyone. Right. And so I think it's really important that that was included in your book. Okay. Somebody else was wondering, what's your favorite magic system, yours or someone else's?
What is my favorite magic system? I kind of like accept the magic system as written. It isn't necessarily that it's like, well, I like this one or I didn't like this one. It's like, what are my rules? Like, what am I operating under? And then I go ahead and I do that. I think probably the favorite one that I've written is actually in a story that I just wrote recently that hasn't actually been sold yet, in which I talk about how magic costs things. Like, the idea is that if you're a magician in the world that I set up, then you're tied to fate, you're tied to destiny, you're tied to kind of this poetic force that makes everything that you do have like consequences according to the universe, and that they will come back to you if you do them. So, and that the magician in the story, she has like certain things, like she can't really, like if somebody comes to her and says, I want this, she can't say like, no, you can't have that, get off my stoop. She has to stop them from wanting it, or she has to make it so that it isn't worth getting what they want. and this is what the story is about, is that somebody comes to her and says, I want this. And she doesn't really know like the whole story about it. She just has a bad feeling about this person and her desires. And so she's like, I need to put this person off by like naming a price that is too high for them to pay. And she names it, and she can feel the universe kind of go clang, challenge accepted. And she's like, oh, no. And that like basically like it isn't something that I could like quantify. Like I couldn't write it down and basically say like, if you have this desire and you're a magician, roll on this table for the result that you're going to get. You would have to have an incredibly fiendish GM to be like, oh, so that's what you want.
Mhm.
Okay. And make it so that like asking for it was probably a mistake.
Yeah. Well, neat. That's exciting. Somebody else is wondering, what other social issues are you interested in writing about? How would you bring them into your fantasy worlds?
Okay. I think like I'm forever talking about social issues. It's kind of what I use fantasy writing to do. Is that I create an imaginary world where I can sandbox something about our world. So like this is just something that I do in my books. Like Witchmark is basically a book that is about, is there such a thing as a good ruling class? Can they operate in the best interests of people who are not them? And as I didn't start with a general idea. Like I mean, I started with what I was gonna do as like a group of people who were doing their best. However, it very quickly became clear to me that self-interest and greed was still like a big part of the world. And so when I was writing the trilogy, I wound up exploring these concepts and getting madder and madder.
Okay, somebody else was wondering, what is your biggest challenge in writing currently?
My biggest challenge in writing currently is writing. Like there's a joke that says that the definition of a writer is someone for whom writing is more difficult than it is for everyone else. And what I have discovered is that I'm really, really slow now. I used to just kind of like bolt out an entire novel in a couple of months, and now I can't do it because I'm like trying to do like 17 simultaneous things perfectly. And
Mhm.
it's really slowed me down.
Somebody else wanted to know if you had any advice for aspiring authors.
Um, what is my advice for aspiring authors? I think probably the most important thing to remember when you're writing and you basically are writing towards a future where you get to write more and people pay you for it, is to really understand your own vision, understand what you want to talk about, what you want to write about, what you like, what you love, and use that as your guiding principle, not, well, like what's hot on the shelves right now. Like, don't do that. Write what you love, write what you want to write. Because when you write a book, you have to literally live with it for like 3 years while it's in production, and then you have to live with it for the rest of its published life.
Mhm.
And so you want your books to be something that you can continually talk about with like pride and enthusiasm. And so that's why it's like some people say write what you know. I'm gonna say write what you love.
Nice, I like that. Someone said, I loved the friendship between Beatrice and Isbeta, two very strong women. How did you build up that relationship, and was it inspired by anything?
Um I've I've had some amazing friends over years. Like the friendship between Beatrice and Isbetta is kind of like I knew that a lot of people with this idea of these two women wanting the same thing would have an adversarial relationship, and that they would have a rivalry, and they would have a competition, and they would have this and they would have that. And I was like, well, what if I don't do that? What if I make it so that they cut a deal with each other before they like each other, and then they like each other, and then they're ride or die. And I was like, no, I like that better. I'm gonna do that instead. So I like basically took the idea of how I have had friendships over the years, like from grade 1 on,
Mhm.
where I was friends usually with a girl, and we made it our mission to understand each other, to know what the other person liked, what they didn't like, what they wanted, what they were afraid of. Like it was like really like I would say my friendships with my best friends are characterized by the pursuit of like knowing each other like really, really well. And so I kind of included that when I had the friendship between Beatrice and Isbetta. I wanted them to understand each other. Um, or I should say, I wanted them to be interested in learning how to understand each other.
Really, that was one of my favorite parts of the story as well. Like it's so important to have positive relationships as opposed to it always being trying to tear one another down or the competition aspect. So it's nice to see that portrayed in a book. I really like that.
Mhm.
Okay. Someone was wondering, absolutely love the character of Nadi. How did you develop the spirit in this book? And was it different to how you develop a human character?
It was definitely different from how I developed a human character because I wanted the spirits to be like I didn't want them to be ghosts. I didn't want them to be like I didn't want them to have the experience of having ever been alive and in a body, because what I wanted was this all-consuming desire to have that. And so when I came up with Nadi, I was like, well, what is the problem with this? Why can't we just get along with these spirits and like let them have what they want? And the answer is they don't have a sense of morality. But I was thinking about the different ways that like a spirit could have like not have a sense of morality. And when I came up with Naughty, who's like, have a good time, eat strawberries, and hex your enemies, I was like, I choose you. I kind of hint at like there being darker possibilities later in the book for like what a spirit personality would be like. But I
Mhm.
really, really wanted Natty to be kind of exasperating and totally endearing.
Yeah, it's something that's like not your typical, but that's exactly what kind of you need, right?
Yeah.
Somebody also wants to know what your favorite part about being an author is and your least favorite part.
What is my favorite part of being an author? I think probably my favorite part of being an author is when it's done and it's a work of literature and people can read it. Um, and then I can finally have the geek out conversation that I have been dying to have ever since I started writing the book.
Mhm.
I have a friend who reads everything that I write and has read everything that I've written for literally years. And so she gets all of my nerd energy while I'm writing a book. Like she knows everything. She knows all the
Mhm.
spoilers. She knows all the plot twists. Um, she knows like what I thought was going to happen and didn't happen. She knows it all, to the point where she's read the published book and been like, "You didn't include that." And I was like, "No, I had to take it out. It didn't work. It's like, oh, I like that part. Um, but what I really like to do is I really like it when a reader comes to me and they'll be like, I read Witchmark and I want to talk to you about the whole idea of like everybody rides bicycles. Where did you get that from? And so I will tell them where I got the idea of like everybody rides bicycles. And then I can be like, what else did you like?
Yeah.
um kind of thing. Like I really like to talk about it because it's just like it's kind of this thing where I have this idea and I have to write this incredibly long story to get the idea out, and I have absolutely no idea if it's any good or not.
Hmm. It must be so rewarding though when you do get that sort of feedback and you're like, yeah, see, I was right. Okay.
Yeah.
So in follow-up to that, Elizabeth is wondering, where did you get the idea about the bicycles in Witchmark? I love the bicycle chase scene.
Well, I have bicycle. Like I bought a bicycle a few years ago and I wanted it to like kind of get around on and stuff like that. And where I live, Calgary, Alberta, there is a bicycle advocacy group called Bike Calgary. And they I don't know if they still do this or not, but there are groups in Calgary that host group rides where you just get together, you meet in one spot, and then the whole bunch of you just like get on the road and ride your bicycle somewhere. There's like a full moon ride where you can go to this one, but you have to have lights in order to do it because it's in the dark. And then Bike Calgary would run a ride once a month regularly, like all year round. And then they had a bike fest where you could do all this other stuff. But I went to my first group ride and there were about 40 people all on bicycles. So obviously once we got on the road, we took up an entire lane of traffic as we were like cruising along downtown Calgary, ringing our bells and carrying on. But we were riding very slowly, and this made it possible that we were literally cycling through a rolling party. Like, so I was just, I was talking to whoever it was that was like beside me on the bicycle, and then somebody else would like come up on the other side and include themselves in conversation, and then they'd be like, I need to go talk to this person about bike polo, and so they would ride ahead and they would talk to somebody else, and it was just so congenial. I was like, this is awesome. Why don't we all do this? Like, I can just cruise along on my bike in my banging outfit, and it's a nice day, and this complete stranger waiting for the light with me is like, it's a nice day, isn't it? I'm like, yes, it's lovely. Not too much of a headwind. And then we just go. And I would have this moment of goodwill between me and a complete stranger. Only it would happen to me multiple times a day, and I would take it completely for granted. I was like, I want this. So I wrote it into a book.
Nice. Okay. Somebody was also wondering, the pandemic has been hard for so many of us, and one of the ways I found to cope is to return to favorite books. Do you have a favorite book or books that you return to?
Okay, so I have this one book. I'm gonna call it my favorite book, because I have had a copy of this book and its sequel continuously since I first read it. Um, the book is called Don't Bite the Sun by Tanith Lee, and the sequel is called Drinking Sapphire Wine. Recently, it was like reissued as a one-volume book called Biting the Sun. And I don't understand why this is my favorite book. I really don't. I don't understand. But this book has stayed with me for like literally decades. Um, it's a story about a far future science fiction utopia in which we can control aging. Death is optional. The world has been environmentally devastated, so humanity basically lives in these domed arcology cities that are completely climate controlled, and culture is completely different. Money doesn't exist. Um, Work doesn't exist. And like people just roll around and have a good time, and when they get bored, enough after like however many centuries of living that they go through. They're like, I am bored with this life. I need a do-over. I need to re-roll my character. And so they undergo something called personality dissolution, where they become a child again and live all over again. And they, they don't know anybody that they knew before or anything like that. And the main character, whose name you never get to learn,
Hmm.
is completely discontented. Like, she is the equivalent of a teenager. She has been a teenager for probably about 100 years. And she's supposed to have a good time, but in these like sharply defined ways, she
Mhm.
is supposed to have a good time. And she's like, I don't like this, but I don't know enough about like any kind of alternative to know what I would like instead. So she goes on a search for meaning. It's kind of like, it's almost like this science fiction version of The Catcher in the Rye, except I think that the main character of Don't Bite the Sun is far more endearing. um and she like goes around looking for meaning, and it's this thin little book, and she doesn't find it.
Oh.
She doesn't find it in the end of the first book. Like, she's just kind of like, I don't know. And the book is over. And I'm like, what the hell?
Yeah. Where was the nice ending?
But like, I keep reading it. I keep going back to it. And I don't know what it is that drives me to always possess this book, but I am dead serious when I say, if I had to like pack my stuff and leave today and never come back, I know exactly where those books are on my bookshelf, and they would go in my suitcase. And that's just all there is to it. So that's how I'm defining my favorite book.
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah. Okay. So kind of offshoot of that, can you recommend some of your favorite queer books for Pride Month?
Okay, so favorite queer books for Pride Month. Let me just, I'm gonna cheat and go to my reading list. Cheating right now.
That's
Watch me
not
cheat.
cheating. That's fair.
Um,
I often don't remember the title of any book that I read. Like I'm like, what was that? I remember the cover, but I don't know.
yeah, it's like, I don't remember. Please read anything you find from Aliette de Bodard. If you're looking specifically for queer stories, it's not that you're more likely to find them in her science fiction. It's just that they're a little bit more like densely concentrated there. Um, the most recent one I read of hers is a novella called Fireheart Tiger. I liked it quite a bit. For a new book that you might want to look at, if you haven't, like, let me just see if I can find it here, because I actually got an advance copy of this a long time ago, so it's like way down on my reading list. The Chosen and the Beautiful. It's a retelling of The Great Gatsby with
Oh.
um it has an element of magic to it that isn't very strong in the first part of the story. Just wait for it. It'll be fine. It's like excellent. Like, I really enjoy how it takes this story. Like, I've read The Great Gatsby a number of times, and
Mhm.
um I will watch the Baz Luhrmann adaptation of The Great Gatsby over and over again. Like, I love it. But I love Baz Luhrmann, so that shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. Um, I'm just looking. Like, I have a lot of like, if you're looking for like romance type things, I would recommend Alexis Hall. He wrote a book, I think it came out a couple of years ago, called Boyfriend Material. It is light.
Mm,
It is light, and it's lighthearted, and I super duper enjoyed it.
mhm.
Um,
That was a good one.
let's see, I'm just looking because I have lots. Like, I I have a lot of I have a lot of books. Um, let's see. Not quite it doesn't quite have a romance. Like I would not call it a romance. Like there's a something going on in the first book of Arkady Martine's duology, A Memory Called Empire. I love this book. I read it in 2019. And I literally finished it crying on a plane. um it,
Wow.
like when you get started, there's a lot of setup that you have to get, because she's like pushing you into this world that doesn't have like an easy analog to compare it to. So just stick by it, because it gets really cool about 70 pages in. You're like, oh, very like intriguey. Like if you like Witchmark and Storm Song, then A Memory Called Empire is a good choice. Neon Yang wrote a series of 4 novellas. I would start with The Black Tides of Heaven, but honestly, you can read them in any order. I like The Black Tides of Heaven because the protagonists are twins. And in their culture, you don't have to decide what gender you are until you decide what gender you are. And I love this. The only other time that I'd ever encountered that was this old book called Golden Witchbreed by Mary Gentle. And it was something where they were talking about it almost in passing. Like the story wasn't about deciding what your gender is. It was just a feature of the alien culture that they were in.
Oh, neat.
Just going down my list. Please read books by Sarah Gailey. I have sitting in front of me is River of Teeth, which is I'm going to call it an alternate history fantasy novel. Apparently somebody in Congress wanted to import hippopotamuses as a meat source, and this didn't happen, fortunately for us. But Sarah Gailey basically took that idea and ran with it, and that's a rollicking good story. I want to talk about Foz Meadows, An Accident of Stars, which is basically the Portal Fantasy to beat all Portal Fantasy. For another one that I really enjoyed was a novella called Passing Strange by Ellen Klages. What can I say? I really like it. It's got elements that I really adore. It's strongly historical. It's set in San Francisco in World War II. And that's good fun. Okay, I think that's a lot.
Good
The book that I'm currently reading is The Unbroken by C.L. Clarke. Please read this book. Please read this book, because it's really excellent. It is like no bones about it. Epic fantasy. Imperialism is bad. Terrain's arms are amazing. And that's really all I want to say. Just please read it.
Nice. That was a great list. Thank you. Somebody was wondering, why did you choose the storyline for Midnight Bargain? Was there an inspiration?
Okay, so like the main storyline of the Midnight Bargain is kind of a classic and like Regency inspired romances. And that's where I got what I wanted to do. Was I wanted to write a book where like kind of examining the idea that marriage was like the most important decision a woman could possibly make in her life. And that like I love the mannerliness and the ritualized courting of Regency romances. So it's like, I'm just gonna grab that. I'm gonna take it and I'm gonna use it.
Kind of on the shoot of that is, would you ever write more books in the world of Midnight Bargain?
wouldn't mind writing another book in the world of Midnight Bargain. It would be like Witchmark, in which there would be another book, but it would be a different protagonist. I don't know if it would have the kind of the trilogy arc that the Kingston Cycle does, but it would be like a book set in that same world, probably with a character that was originally in the Midnight Bargain, like Isbetta or Harriet. But right now I don't have a manuscript for that, but like I'm not going to say no.
Mhm. It's percolating. Who's your favorite character in the Midnight Bargain?
um how do I choose? How do I choose? I I'm pretty fond of Harriet. I know some people are like, Harriet's super annoying, and I know Harriet is a cultural expert. It's just that she is an expert in subjects that we are trained to think of as frivolous. But like when it comes to like etiquette, courtship, and the marriage game, Harriet's knowledge cannot be beat. Like she is the master.
Mhm.
Um, and I like enjoyed it because one of the things that maybe didn't make it onto the page is that Harriet is super worried about Beatrice's future, because her future hangs off of Beatrice's choices.
Mhm.
So she doesn't get the life she wants if
Mhm.
Beatrice screws this up. um, and then it isn't until like later in the book that she starts to wonder, it's like, wait a minute, like what exactly about this life is what I want?
Mhm. So, which spirit would you bind yourself if you were a magician in this world?
Hmm. I think I think like is better. I would go after a spirit of knowledge.
Mhm.
Um, just because I am pretty curious and like I like to know stuff. Um, I I find that I don't necessarily want to go like pick one subject and go deep. I want to pick 100 subjects and skip across them like a stone,
Mhm.
and just basically be like, this is neat, this is neat, this is neat, this
Mhm.
is neat. So it wasn't exactly like the kind of intellectual attitude that you should take to say a university degree.
You chose to have all the parents support Beatrice and Isbetta, even though they were very against this throughout the book. It was definitely a happy ending. Was that planned, or were there other endings?
I always knew when I started writing the book that everything was going to turn out fine. And that like knowing that everything was going to turn out fine was like what was driving me through the book, was that I wanted to see like I wanted to see how everything was going to turn out fine turned out. um and that um like Beatrice's father, Henry, Henry isn't exactly a bad person. He wants what's best for Beatrice. It's just that his idea of what's best for Beatrice is very traditional. And what Beatrice wanted, she had to keep it a secret from him. So everything that he did was what he imagined to be in her best interest. And when she finally was like, Father, I have found my happiness, he's like, good job, kid. What else can I say? Like there wasn't
Mhm.
any reason for him to be a jerk about it. um and then like Iante and Isbetta's mother had like much more sharply defined ideas about like what her children were going to do. But she doesn't hate her kids. So when her daughter is like, I don't want what you want for me. Like I do not. And look at how far I have come to prove that I don't want what you want for me. She doesn't hate her daughter. So she's like, I'm gonna have to change my plans because, like, what good parent would not?
Mhm. Somebody was wondering, are you a plotter or are you a pantser?
I don't know. I have like heavily plotted books. Um, the last book of the Kingston Cycle, um, I outlined that down to the scene. It was a scene by scene outline in detail. And then I basically sat down, I pulled a scene card, I wrote the scene that was on the scene card, I threw that scene card away and picked out the next one. So I am a plotter, but not all the time.
Somebody's wondering, I guess if you could tell us more about what you're working on right now.
I haven't really told anybody like much in the way of details of what I am writing right now. I'm writing a very long book. It has 3 characters with point of view and their own agenda. It is very definitely a high epic fantasy. It is these 3 characters are all graduate students in their final year of university. They are all magicians. And they are like training as magicians in their various specialties in university.
So this is kind of a different question. If you could have dinner with any author, living or deceased, who would it be and why?
John Gardner.
Hmm.
John Gardner. Mostly because like I didn't become familiar with him until after he had died, and I started with his books on becoming a novelist, and they were all very thoughtful, and like I learned a lot from them. And then I, read his novels, and I was just like, I envy everyone who got to learn from this guy. I envy them. And so like dinner with John Gardner would be the next best thing to like entering an MFA program where he was an instructor.
Nice. I was wondering if you could maybe tell us a little bit about your experience being Canada Reads finalist. It's really cool. And congratulations.
Thank you. It was a huge surprise. I like have kept my eye on Canada Reads over the years, and Canada Reads has like nominated science fiction novels before, but fantasy novels not so often. Fantasy romance novels, kind of standing alone here.
Yeah.
Like, what happened?
Well, it was really cool. Like how was the experience like did you find that you were, got a whole different audience participating or like, how was it to be part of like the conversations? Like, how did you find it all?
I really don't know. Like I know that more people read my book, The Midnight Bargain, than they had read the previous books. However, a lot of the people who like are new readers for The Midnight Bargain aren't necessarily the kind of people that kind of like barge up to me on Twitter and be like, "Hey, I want to talk to you about this book." Where like more stalwart science fiction and fantasy readers are probably a lot more used to their writers being accessible for these kinds of questions. So like I got a lot more people following me on Twitter, but not necessarily a lot more conversation.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it's kind of, yeah. And I mean, if they have a question, they know where to find me.
Someone was wondering, who would you cast to play your main characters in a TV show or movie adaptation of it?
Like I was supposed to do a fan cast as part of the promotional material for the Midnight Bargain, and I didn't do it. And I didn't do it because I was like, I don't want to get stuck on the idea of somebody in particular playing any particular role. I want to leave that up
Yeah.
to the casting director kind of thing, because I have this thing in my head about Witchmark and about how Miles Singer should be played by Hale Appleman, who was like Elliot Waugh in The Magicians, and I'm stuck on it. And it's just kind of like, I'm gonna like, please, can we have Hale Appleman? And I am reasonably sure that I am not going to get to see Hale Appleman perform as Miles Singer.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that's not going to happen, and I don't want to get my hopes up anymore.
Fair enough. Do you now see that character as, like, in your mind, do you only picture it as the actor now?
I was like having a conversation with a bunch of people who were talking about the idea of Witchmark being a musical, and the idea of Miles basically, in order to symbolize his like repressed character nature, is that in the start of the musical, he doesn't sing. He never sings. He never dances until we get to a point later in story where he literally jumps up on a desk and starts singing a song about his feelings for Tristan. And I'm like, that is perfect. And Hale Appleman can sing.
See, it's right. It's all right for you. It's great. Okay. So all of your books are so far in a fantasy worlds. How does that impact the gender and relationships in your writing?
Basically, like, I love alternative world fantasy storytelling because then I get to decide what makes sense for my culture. I get to decide. Like, one of the things that I did in Witchmark was that I decided that I wanted Witchmark to be less sexist than our society, and I wanted it to be less homophobic than our society. But that didn't necessarily, like, I didn't necessarily feel like no sexism was the right way to go in the story. Like, I needed some.
Mhm.
And like no homophobia, because I needed some, just in order to tell the story that I was going to tell, because a lot of that story is about contorting yourself to meet the expectations of the people around you. And so I needed restrictions. With the story that I am currently writing, one of the things that I'm doing is I have a long history of like lots of different kinds of relationships being like valid, accepted, normal, and like you don't even really think about them anymore. Like,
Mhm.
I wrote this like deep backstory story about like an a king who was deeply in love with another man, and everybody knew, like
Mhm.
there's no like they were best friends narrative in the histories or whatever. It was just sort of like they were in love, like
Mhm.
they had a relationship and they openly had it, and there was nothing wrong with it. Another story deep in the backstory is about the founder of the empire that my story is set in, and that on the occasion of her founding the empire, she had 3 lovers and she kept them all. She kept them all.
Mhm.
She didn't fall into this whole monogamous marriage thing. She was like, this is my family, you
Mhm.
got to deal with it. And
Yeah.
that practice continued like over the like 2000 years or however long that the empire has been in place. So nobody ever thinks about it. It's like, if you're in a polyamorous relationship, you're just in a polyamorous relationship. If you're in a same-sex relationship, that's what you're in. If you're like asexual. Nobody cares. Like, it's all fine. Like, do whatever it is you need to do. Consult your lawyer about who gets your belongings when you die. It's all good.
I like that. Well, I think we're pretty much out of time. So I really appreciate you speaking with us tonight. Thank you so much. And I hope everybody really enjoyed it. I'm sure they did. And thank you so much.
Okay, glad to be here.
Have a great night, everyone. Bye.
Bye.